just not enough people doing decent cyber defense in the UK. It's terrible.
I think the other thing that we underestimate when you hear Keir Starmer and John Healey, the Defence Secretary, talking about increasing defence spending up to 3%, 5%, whatever it's going to be, is that our nuclear defences will continue to take an enormous part of that. This new deal with the French notwithstanding, there is already a sort of, I think it's running about 7 billion, what they call a kind of equipment gap. And then, of course, you've got the whole personnel issue on top of that. So even at 3%, if the threat is genuinely more serious than it was, you're talking about pretty tight resourcing. And just finally on the economic point, Rory, so basically during, and this is very, very inexact. So, for example, you can point to the Soviet Union, which had a defence spending of regularly in double figures and often up to 20%, and basically an economy that was completely crippled because the money never went anywhere else. But in our economies, growth has been higher when there has been higher defence spending in general. And I'm not suggesting, by the way, that's one of the reasons for our state nation.
But I think that's basically because growth was higher in the 50s, 60s and 70s, and that's much more to do with the youthful population.
Yeah, for sure.
New technologies coming on, right? And it happened to be the time we spent defence.
I guess the point I'm making is that you can look at any of these examples and fit them to make any argument. Ultimately, we have to make political judgments, that's the political leadership of the country, and we all have to make judgments about whether we take this threat seriously, because if we do, then I think we all have to change our mindset about it.
Okay, so let's maybe finish this one by my agreeing with you on that if we are going to spend this money, boy, we better change the way that we spend this money. So that's partly your point about coordinating much more closely with Europe, understanding that Britain, even if it spent 5%, can't actually operate completely independently against Russia. It could only do so as part of a much, much bigger multinational unit. We need to work out which bit of that we're providing, which bits the others are providing. Yeah. Secondly, understand that these defense companies rip us off again and again, and it's a really, really inefficient way of spending money to just hand money either over to American companies like Raytheon and Northrop Grumman, or even hand over money to our own big defense contractors. These are massively inefficient, costly private sector companies in a very kind of, I think, unhealthy relationship with government that has the government overbound. And that's true in Europe too. I think one of the problems is that we fantasize that Europe will suddenly have this amazing defense industrial policy, whereas probably what they'll end up doing is just handing over money to massive French and German defense contractors who will be very inefficient.
Maybe the bridge into tariffs is maybe to say this, that I think there's been a kind of unwritten rule that this whole thing's breaking down because Trump is no longer seeing himself as remotely as a protector of Europe. I think part of the unwritten rule of our reliance on the US was that we wouldn't sort of put all the money into our own defences, but insofar as we did, we would buy loads and loads of stuff from the United States. There was a bit of a quid pro quo going on that. Now, the other thing that has happened is whether countries like ours, and countries like Turkey, and countries maybe like the Saudis, I don't know, Japan, develop their own defence industrial capacity in a way that actually starts to fill that gap. Because I think that one of the things that's happening right now, and this is the direct link to tariffs, and maybe this is what we should talk about now, is the observation that if you feel that a close friend is moving away from you, you maybe start to look at other places. I think it was very interesting that when Donald Trump announced the new tariffs in the European Union, for example, Ursula von der Leyen was in Indonesia. Why was she in Indonesia? Because she was doing a big new trade deal between the European Union and Indonesia. So why don't you use that as the peg into this week's tariff reality TV show?
I think tariffs, if defense is the most dramatic story because it's war and conflict and it reminds us of the Second World War, tariffs is probably the most important economic story, and it's one that we're not maybe focusing on enough because Trump plays the hokey-cokey. He puts Trump tariffs up, he brings them down, and he seemed to blink against China. So actually, if you look at the markets, they've got very complacent. When, on the 2nd of April, he announced these big tariffs, markets crashed, bond markets went wrong. Now when he plays around, they barely respond. And I think that's because they've got themselves into a mindset of thinking, well, basically it'll be 10%, and he'll put some tariffs on steel and aluminium and chips. But in the end, when push comes to shove, he blinks. And this was the sort of taco story. Trump always chickens out because he blinked with China. But meanwhile, with nobody really concentrating, of course, nobody was concentrating. In fact, when he brought them down on the 2nd of April, he didn't say, I'm giving up on them. He said, it's going to be 90 days. And the 90 days has just run out.
Hold on, he said he was going to do 90 deals.
90 deals in 90 days, yeah. During which time he succeeded in doing maybe 1.5 deals in 90 days.
Yeah.
And then
Two frameworks.
And the 90 days then ran out. Now, what's really interesting is that during that time, many countries very, very earnestly have been working away. And maybe the best way of showing this is through Europe. So Europe is a huge trading partner for the US. 18.5% of US imports comes from the European Union. The European trade negotiators have been working day in, day out for 3 months. And if you'd looked at the reporting 10 days ago, right from the inside of the US and European camps, they felt that they had ended up on something that would be a sort of version of the deal that Keir Starmer got. It was going to be 10% baseline, few exceptions. And then if you've seen your friend Mujtaba Rahman being interviewed a week ago, he's saying it'll be 10% and we'll knock holes in it like a Swiss cheese with a whole series of exemptions and stuff that we get. That began to get a little shaky about a week ago. But then the optimistic story was, okay, Europe is going to offer a concession on digital service taxes. And this is what Canada just did with Mark Carney. He's suddenly abandoned a 3% tax on American digital companies. And it'll be fine. We'll get it through. We're almost there. We're working with these very senior people. And then suddenly, Trump on Saturday puts out something which says not only is the entire deal off, 3 months negotiations out the window, but he's not just going back to where we were on the 2nd of April, he's putting it further up. The EU tariffs were 20%, he's put them up to 30%. The Mexico tariffs were 25%, he's put it up to 30%. Canada's tariffs on the 2nd of April, 25%, he's put it up to 35%. Japan's gone up slightly, South Korea's stayed the same. So it's shattering. I think the thing that I really say is anybody who is being complacent, buying into the taco theory, saying Trump doesn't mean it, he's never going to do it in the end, there's no evidence for that. I think the evidence suggests that Trump loves tariffs and he will, throughout his presidency, put them up whenever it suits him to achieve any number of different things. Maybe he's chasing trade deficits, maybe he just likes humiliating people, getting concessions. But we can assume, if you're running a business, that we are in the most unpredictable global trade environment that's existed for almost 100 years.
Yeah, where you're right, and this is really interesting, I think this is because the world has really come to see that Trump is doing the reality TV show that we talk about with Michael Wolff. He is sort of his day by day a different story. And then there's this sort of complete lack of clarity issue. And you see interviews. So I saw an interview with one of his people the other day, and it was just mind-blowing because the interviewer was trying to get them. They were actually talking about the role of Congress, and Congress can only be bypassed in relation to putting on sanctions like this when there is a national security issue or a national emergency issue. So the question the interviewer kept manfully, personally putting to this person, I've forgotten who it was, but it's one of his sort of, MAGA people, was what is the national security issue? What is the national emergency that leads to Trump's fears of Bolsonaro going to jail requiring Americans to get more expensive coffee? Because this is the other thing. Trump talks, and because we know that Trump, if he says something, he believes it to be true, and he thinks he can persuade his followers to believe it can be true. But the truth is, apart from a little bit in Hawaii, America doesn't make coffee. Lots of Americans drink lots of coffee, so it gets imported from places like Brazil. And suddenly, he's put a 50% tariff on it. And then, you mentioned Canada there, Rory. So the basic tariff's gone up to 35%. There's already a 50% tariff on steel and aluminium. And none of these people who've been interviewed on behalf of Trump, none of them can say, is the new tariff 35%? Is it 50 still? Because that's higher than 35. Or is it actually 85? And so the lack of clarity, that's what suggests to me that he's just throwing these numbers out. And there's a guy, I don't know if you follow this guy, Rory, he's an Australian economist, but he's based in the States, and he's really, really good at explaining complicated things, called Justin Wolfers. And he clocked 11 so far. I'll do them very, very quickly. The different reasons that Trump has given for his tariffs. The first lot, if you remember, on Canada, it was fentanyl.
Yep.
Then it was illegal immigration from Canada and Mexico.
Yep.
Then it was to save manufacturing in the Midwest.
Yep.
Then it was to boost national security. Then it was to avoid income tax rises. Then it was to solve the deficit. Then it was leverage for trade deals, 90 deals in 90 days. Then it was to defend the role of the dollar as the reserve currency. Then it was to get Canada to drop the digital services tax, which they did. Then it was to get Spain to spend more on defence. And finally, it's to keep his fellow insurrectionists against his own constitution, Bolsonaro, out of jail.
To pay tribute to another Australian, my hero, Dmitry Grozubinski, who I spoke to for an hour on this, who is written this incredibly good, amusing, intelligent book on tariffs and trade, which I'd really recommend to people. He would say that underlying those are 5 completely contradictory ideas around tariffs. So I think we talked about it a little bit before. We've talked about the fact that, one is you manufacture in China, then you charge at the US border and you make a lot of money. So it's about revenue. Number 2, it's about reshoring, moving manufacturing to the US, so then you don't get the revenue because we're making it in the US. Number 3, you're doing it for something else, like fentanyl or immigration, in which case it's not economic at all. Number 4, you're doing it because you're in a 50-year fight with China, and the whole thing is really just about impoverishing China to stop it building up its military. And number 6, I think, is just a general sense that you're enjoying the game of extortion, concessions, humiliation. Maybe that's the sort of thing that binds it all together. Along with the first one, which is obsession with trade deficits, is just this sense that it's a tool in his arsenal to allow us to humiliate people. Brazil, though, is the most interesting. You're right, and I should have raised it, because Brazil is the one example of these countries that doesn't actually have a trade surplus with the United States. So generally what he's doing is he's going after countries that sell more to the US than they buy from the US. And of course, one of the big reasons for that, again, as Dmitry points out, is that US consumers are wealthy and spend a lot of money. The average American household spends 2.5 times more a year than the average German household. And a lot of the goods they buy come from abroad, right? But in the case of Brazil, that isn't the problem. Brazil is importing more from the US than it's exporting. So there, what he's doing is he's saying that he hates Lula, that he thinks the case against Bolsonaro, his fellow populist leader who's basically on trial for trying to stage a coup d'etat, is fake. And he's very much against the Supreme Court Justice, Alexandre de Morales, who's a very, very controversial figure that we were talking about over the weekend, who is a hero of the left and an absolute enemy of other people in Brazil, because he's doing many things which are pretty close to absolutist, authoritarian and illegal, to go after anybody who he thinks is on Bolsonaro's side, including imprisoning business people for making jokes about coup d'etats on WhatsApps, locking up congressmen for 9 years for contempt of court, this sort of stuff. So all of this stuff is happening. But my question to you is, how would the world react if China went around doing this?
Oh, exactly.
I get all kinds of coots coming in
I mean,
here.
let's say China had got in touch with France and said, we'll be imposing a 50% tariff on you unless you release Marine Le Pen from jail.
Yeah, or if they'd done the same with us and said, unless Julian Assange is released and freed from the whichever embassy he was in, with Ecuador. The answer to your question is that we would say this was unacceptable, bullying, intimidating behaviour by a rogue state. That's what we'd say. But I think this goes to the heart of the way that Trump now operates. He basically, in all of his international affairs, there's a little bit of divide and rule, but what there's a lot of is the demanding of obsequiousness in exchange for not usually political support, but just sort of not giving you quite as hard as hard a time as he otherwise could. And I don't know if you saw, Roy, the now infamous meeting with the African leaders where he congratulated the Liberian president on his excellent English, either not knowing or pretending not to know that English is the language of Liberia. But 3 of the leaders who were there, Senegal, Gabon and Mauritania, all, as part of their prepared remarks, basically said that they thought Donald Trump should get the Nobel Peace Prize. So this is all just part of we're all, when we say we, I don't think you and I are, but I think large parts of the world are playing into this idea that he's the king of the world. He has actually become what Boris Johnson always wanted to be, world king, and that's how he has to get treated.
Can you help me understand what's going on with this culture of so many political leaders coming pretty close to embarrassing themselves in falling over backwards to be unbelievably obsequious. I know people say it's like dealing with a king, but actually, my memory of kind of medieval Britain.
Were you around then, Rory?
I was definitely around then. Yeah, I know I was older than you think. Is that they didn't actually cringe in quite this way. That if you were a knight or a lord going in to see an English king, you tried to preserve your dignity. Yes, you were polite, but you didn't actually grovel on the ground, call them daddy, tell them they were the best person ever. And if you did, you'd suffer real contempt. I mean, I can't, you see, look, let me put it, forget medieval England. I can't imagine Angela Merkel or Theresa May groveling to Trump in the way that Mark Rutte's groveling to Trump.
Rutte was the most obvious. However, the reason that sort of was so damaging was because it was the combination of what he said in private with what he then said in public with the daddy thing that sort of took it to a different level. I thought actually watching these African leaders, it was pretty obsequious. I mean, the truth about the Nobel Peace Prize, anybody with any sense of the state of the world right now is going to say it is a total absurdity. Added to which, not least because of which is sometimes called the Richard Holbrooke principle, the Nobel Committee basically thinks if you openly, overtly campaign to get the Nobel Peace Prize or talk about your own strength and why you should get it, it makes it less likely that you will get it. But he will be saying, yeah, but I break all the rules. This is like a global intimidation campaign of these 5 people on the committee that I mentioned last week. But he's co-opting all these other leaders. And here's one. Nick Thomas-Symonds, the British minister, was on the radio recently, and I actually think he's actually a very good minister. And he's done all the kind of European negotiations and that sort of thing. But at the end of the interview, it was thrown at him, Benjamin Netanyahu has said that Trump should get the Nobel Peace Prize. Do you agree? And of course, as we get closer to the state visit, which now been announced for September, they're all going to get asked this. So my advice to the British government, have a line ready, make sure it is not yes. but make sure that it's something that Trump could maybe not take as a total rejection.
Let me just weave these two ideas that you've got together, which is Trump obsequious Nobel Peace Prize and defense spending. The truth is that Trump is a contributor, massive contributor to global conflict because, in essence, the peace that existed since the Second World War was based on a rules-based international order, NATO, the UN, US as a global policeman, and a sense that you did not invade neighbors and that certain kinds of things were not acceptable. International law. And of course, there was hypocrisy, and many listeners will get in touch and say there was a lot of nonsense going on in the 80s and 90s, and the US got a great deal wrong, as did the UK. But Trump is the first president to set about very deliberately to dismantle that entire international system, to show complete contempt for international law, for the UN, for allies, for state borders. He's somebody who has made it perfectly clear that he sympathizes with Putin and authoritarian strongmen, and therefore he has created, it's no coincidence that he comes in 2016, and a lot of what we've seen over the last 10 years, every year, more internally displaced people, refugees, conflict stems from Trump's style of isolationism and populism. He drives the conflict. And the consequence of that is that he creates the conditions which makes Putin and Russia become an existential threat to Europe. He creates the conditions which then forces Europe to have to increase its defense spending. He creates the conditions which will lead to hundreds of billions of euros being removed from our health, education, and welfare budgets over the next few years. Our people will get poorer, less educated, less healthy. The world will become more dangerous thanks to Donald Trump. And that's what the Nobel Peace Prize Committee should remember.
Very well put. But also, you're looking at today, as he goes around saying, and as Netanyahu says, this guy's bringing peace to countries in the region. The fact is, he is a driver of this Gaza, quotes, humanitarian fund, which, and we're going to talk about this in question time, where so many people are being killed while they're queuing for food. Gaza is, we keep hearing the ceasefire's coming, but has it yet come? No. He's enabling and empowering Netanyahu in his style of politics. And then you've got Russia-Ukraine, which is not in a better place than it was when he said he was going to resolve it in 24 hours. Added to which, you've talked a lot, Rory, about this sort of, sense of the conflict that there is right across Africa from from west to east. But there again, he has the African leaders in the country the other day. What was his real interest in all that? It was about minerals, and it was about copper, and it was about mines, and it's all about the money stuff. So no, we disagree slightly about defence. I think we are fundamentally united in our view that the Nobel Prize Committee's reputation would be zero, literally zero overnight, if it were to make the mistake of giving the award to Donald Trump. I actually think it was a mistake to give it to Obama so early in his presidency.
I agree.
But there we are. Not as big a mistake as Gandhi never getting it. I think that was a bad one. Gandhi never got it. While we're talking about defence, Rory, I think our leading interview this week is with a friend of yours, Democrat Congressman Seth Moulton, who is not just interesting because he's a congressman with some very, very harsh words to say about Trump, but also some very harsh words to say about his own side as well. But also one of those congressmen who really was a sort of serious military veteran, and with some, I thought, really moving accounts of his time serving in Iraq in particular, when he clearly didn't believe in the policy he was involved in. But people are interested in that whole thing about the sort of defence, military switch to politics. I really enjoyed it. I actually think in our Upsum, I listened back to it today. I think we were a little bit harsh actually. I found him really impressive listening back. Really impressive.
So pleased to hear that. Yeah, I was sad that you said that you didn't think he should be president. I'm pushing for Seth to run again for the presidency. People can listen to it, of course, on The Rest is Politics Leading, on our leading stream.
Yeah, I definitely think he's got a lot of what it takes. Let's take a break and then we'll come back with Britain.
This episode is brought to you by Penguin Audiobooks.
And this is a treat for audiobook obsessives among you, and that does include me when I'm travelling and Rory pretty much all the time.
So we've teamed up with Penguin, and we've got now the Rest is Politics Audiobook Club, where we're going to recommend titles we spent real time with, those that gripped us, stirred us, or echoed long after they ended. Big ideas, brilliantly told.
So I am going to start with a book that I mentioned on the podcast when I first read it. It is called The Nazi Mind by Lawrence Rees. And it is an incredible account of how ideology can warp entire societies.
My recommendation would be Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, which recasts your entire understanding of history and philosophy.
So these are not books that you're going to flick through.
Damn you to hell! What a day, huh? I won't forget this. Hey! Untie me now! You're making a mistake. Not for me. I'll wriggle out of this when I do. Hello there.
And whom do we have here? Got a cold sale all lined up for them. Good money for bad business.
Hi. All right then.
Now, don't you be up to no good with that. Hell! You gonna explain your damn self, huh?
Guess you changed your mind. Oh, y'all just walked into your worst nightmare.
Looks like your time's up. Whoa! You sure as shit don't belong here, do you? Gonna cut you down! This'll be the last. Oh, shit! What in the...
Tell me, how are things? Very good. Very good.
Get away from me! Oh, you there! Please help! I'm out! Oh, God, I'm out! Oh, this isn't good.
Congra. Dime a dozen these days. Lucky this is popular, how common it is. Okay. Dime a dozen these days. Pleasure doing business.
¡Esta me la pagas! ¡Esto no es lo mío! ¡Gilipollas!